This week on Talk to Al Jazeera, actor and comedian Richard Lewis.
My goal is to make people laugh. First of all, I'm not depressed a lot of the time either, let me just say, I want to paint this rosy picture.
Often described as neurotic and angst-ridden, Lewis reflects on his rise from early stand-up comedy to becoming a household name.
And I was broke for a long time, but I was still felt like $1 million broke, living in horrible places, going into a club and seeing these famous comedians come over to me and go, you have it, you're gonna make it.
He's out with a new book that showcases his jokes, illustrated by Carl Titolo. Reflections from Hell is Richard Lewis's guide on how not to live. It focuses a lot on his parents.
I had not a great upbringing. I was an alcoholic and a drug addict for a long time. I was in horrible relationships by my own doing. I wasn't always their fault. I own up to a lot of that.
As an actor, Lewis starred in Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm. The two first met when they were 12.
In a summer camp, sports camp, hated each other, never saw each other until we were comedians, became inseparable best friends. That ran over a course of almost a decade. And Larry came over to my house, you had asked me, and he said, do you mind playing yourself?
And now he's starring in another television series called Blunt Talk.
Playing a psychiatrist is really a trip for me because I've been in and out of therapy and psychiatry for almost my whole life.
I spoke to Richard Lewis in New York.
You've been sober for 21 years.
Almost 21.
Almost 21 years sober.
Yes.
You're married.
Married, 10 years.
You have a great career.
It's been going on for 45 years and all sorts of stuff. This is like a really great time touring and a new book and a new series.
You know, you've got all this great stuff going on. You're a household name. So then why in the world do you call your book Reflections from Hell, Richard Lewis's guide on how not to live? Life can't be that bad.
No, it's not really. Well, I had not a great upbringing. I was an alcoholic and a drug addict for a long time. I was in horrible relationships by my own doing. It wasn't always their fault. I own up to a lot of that. Made a lot of amends to people. So that was my sweet spot in comedy. My father died before I was a comedian. My brother was old. I was really young. I was a mistake. There was no doubt in my mind. When I was born, my father looked like Moses. My mother was already in a Eugene O'Neill play, going down. My sister eloped when I was 12. And my brother was reading, Allen Ginsberg poems in the village, and I'm there alone with my poor mother. It was like a combination of Long Day's Journey into Night and Odd Couple.
And you write a lot about your parents.
So that's why I'm writing this book. But right to the nitty-gritty, Carl Nicholas Titolo is an artist I met 35 years ago through an old buddy. And I was blown away by this guy. And he's a legendary professor at the School of Visual Arts in New York for 40 years. But his art style was very close to my riffing, free associating. And I always wanted to collaborate with him, but didn't know how. And about 2 years ago, I came up with an idea. I said, look, I have some thoughts, not jokes, but some of them may be jokes, but I didn't care about them. Like any thought, and I'll call you with 5 and 6 years. I like this one, goodbye. And then he would do an image. And as it turned out, there have been several collaborations like this, not to be grandiose, but Edgar Allan Poe did The Raven and Manet illustrated it on each page.
Right, but how about a comedian's jokes being illustrated? Is that original? Has anybody ever done that?
Probably not. I think it's really authentic. And for me, I've been, if I don't, when I grew up, I had idols, in the arts. The arts saved my life when I was a kid. The family was really dysfunctional. And so if I saw a movie as a kid and I couldn't believe how great it was, maybe I didn't understand the art form. Like let's say when I was 12 or I saw Dr. Strangelove, I would sit after the movie was over. Maybe I obviously didn't get the total understanding of the Russians and this and the Cold War. But I knew I saw something so spectacular that in my head, something like that, a bar was set. And then when I got older, I went to college and I saw, and then the new wave of films came in with Truffaut and Godard, and then I saw Cassavetes movies, and then I would listen to Miles Davis and Hendrix. Then I heard Lenny Bruce, and then became friends and saw Richard Pryor. I went, these bars, and it's just a few names. I said, if I ever go on stage, and I did it about a month or two after my dad died, I said, I have to reach for I have to unravel myself on stage as fearlessly as possible and see if I get laughs. Because I really did feel pretty much like a Chagall painting, but I was sort of tethered to nothing because I really didn't have much of a family life. So the audience became my family.
Well, and all that led to what at times was crippling depression. You had serious problems with addiction. What do you tell people who think, here's a guy who had all sorts of successful sitcoms, movies, books, and all this, and who say they can't understand how somebody like you could have gone through that?
And I don't even know I know what success means, okay? I get it, and I've earned it. Nothing mattered more to me than finding myself on stage and becoming authentic. And I was broke for a long time, but I still felt like $1,000,000 broke, living in horrible places, going into a club and seeing these famous comedians come over to me and go, you have it, you're gonna make it, but you gotta work your ass off. You gotta do this 24/7. These were the greats telling me this.
Has anxiety always been kind of the fuel to your comedy? You've been dubbed the Prince of Pain, and in the book, you describe yourself as the best sparring partner I can have. So does beating yourself up diffuse the anxiety, or does it actually make it better?
That's a great question. God, I haven't seen my therapist in quite a while. It's reminded me. I am not as unhappy as people think I am. But my sweet spot, and one of the lines is that desperation is my sweet spot. That's a craft that I honed. And even though I got sober, I got more grateful, I got more spiritual in my later years. Still, when I hear, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Lewis, and my goal is to make people laugh. First of all, I'm not entirely not depressed a lot of the time either, by the way. I want to paint this rosy picture. But it's much rosier than being near death on crystal meth, let's put it that way.
But you write in the book, you've got one that says happiness is overrated, there's nothing to fear but life itself.
Well, because life has dealt me a lot of bad blows, nothing close to the majority of the world. And what bugs me is that when people say, hey, you hang out with the Stones, or yeah, you were, I used to work for the Clintons a lot when he was running, and Gore, and you're in the White House, and how can you be? I go, hey, time out, man. I suffer from depression. I have obsessive compulsive disorder. I work my butt off. I have no children, so it's all about my art until I met my wife, and then it was taking care of her. And my sister has 4 kids, 10 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. I try to be some kind of role model. It's sort of frightening, I understand.
Does she let them watch you?
Well, not until they're 30.
Talking about your family, your good friend Larry David. He says, he says that you use shrink as much as teenagers use like. And so pardon me for acting like a shrink, but let's talk about your family. I mean, you really go after your parents in this book, especially your mom. You write, the worst audience I ever had were my parents. My mother tried to switch me at birth.
Yeah.
After I was born, my mother asked her friends to breastfeed me.
Yeah.
How much of a role did your mom play in your dark humor?
Well, what do you think? Listen, here's the deal. I made amends with my mother my mother was very ill. She had a lot of emotional problems in her late 30s on, and until she got old. And I tried my best to understand it, but again, realize back, when she was having her problems, I was an active addict. So, I couldn't have been easy either. So when she really lost it at the end, my sister I have an older sister and an older brother. She was with her and made sure she would get the best care. And so did I. And all of us tried to do what we could do. And I remember something when she was in the hospital and she was near death, and she really didn't know who she was at that point. And I grabbed onto her and I said, look, I was far from perfect. Neither one of us were, but I love you, and please forgive anything I did. And if you can, because I forgive you for everything. I mean, I did, and I do. I don't hold on to it. And I said, just squeeze me. And you have to understand, this was at a point where she was insane, basically. And she grabbed my hand and squeezed it, and I'll always remember that. But that doesn't mean that I can't mine those feelings, because we did have a pretty tough relationship. And I'm no comic if I'm not telling the truth. Comedian, rather. I prefer that word.
And one of the truths you like to tell is describing things as being from hell. And
yes, which is now literally...
Yes, and I was going to say, one of the funniest headlines I have ever read was something that said, Yale University gives Richard Lewis hell. And what it was referring to is the fact that the Yale Book of Quotations gave you credit for that phrase. Anything being from hell is now you are the author of it.
Listen, it's in light of the fact that the world's gone and has been insane forever anyway. I mean, it's just now we're living now and we see what's going on. It means very little to me, except in a very small swath of humanity and in my life. I popularized the phrase back in the 70s and 80s when I did about 50 or 60 David Letterman shows, and I chose that metaphor, and I was. Probably, yes, I was an active alcoholic, so I never took responsibility for my actions. So it was like, oh, I just came from a wedding from hell, or a family reunion from hell, because I always felt like I'm the victim. So I used that all the time. And it was but then I got bummed out because I saw it in ads, like in movie ads, Boys from Hell. I said, this is starting to bug me, because they're starting to market it. And I know I popularized it, so I tried to get to this Bartlett's quotations.
And Bartlett said no to you.
Said no to me. This editor said, no, I'm sorry, my nieces, he was in his probably 60s at the time, he says, my nieces just came back from college after their semester, and they said, oh, it was a semester from hell. I went, oh, no kidding. They said that, then they must, I mean, they weren't watching Letterman late night shows in college back in the 80s and this and the night, So I finally couldn't take it anymore, and out of the blue, Yale saved the day, and
you've been immortalized as
Bartlett's
being from hell.
Yeah.
It's the lunch from hell.
What? What did you say?
I'm saying this is the lunch from hell.
Where'd you hear that expression?
Girlfriend?
You see what I mean? It kills me.
Richard Lewis and Larry David are now the best of friends, but it wasn't always that way. More on their bromance ahead on Talk to Al Jazeera. I'm Antonio Mora. You're watching Talk to Al Jazeera. My guest this week is comedian Richard Lewis.
Who's your favorite comedian of all time?
Well, there's two. Lenny Bruce for what he did for the First Amendment and his body of his work, but perhaps the greatest stand-up comedian other than, I think, Lenny, and maybe arguably the greatest stand-up comedian is Richard Pryor, because Richard Pryor had so many tools. So Richard Pryor, to me, is the greatest individual stand-up of all time, and Lenny Bruce, the most important.
You became successful pretty early. You started going to the clubs in New York.
I was on with Carson in almost 2.5 years, and that's pretty fast. And I had a lot of breaks, too. I had Letterman he came over to me and he says, you're good with Johnny. Some nights are better than others, but when you do stand-up, the camera's right there. And I'm real kinetic for a minute. What did you ask me?
You were talking about Letterman and how Letterman.
Oh yeah, well Letterman said
tried to use you in a different way than Carson.
Yes, he did exactly. He called me in '81 before his late night show, and he said you can come on as often as you want. In fact, you can write for the show if you want to move back to New York. I went no, I just had moved to LA 5 years or so before, and I said. But he says, don't do stand-up anymore on TV. I mean, specials is one thing, and concerts and everything, But he says, when you come on my show, you're just going to sit. And he set a precedent for me, which I never broke. I have never done stand-up on television. So like when new shows come out now and they say, oh, we want to do 5, 6, I said, no, what is this, open mic night? I've been doing it 45 years. It doesn't happen often.
Oh, I finally got black K-Swiss. That's a whole other story. Anyway, so...
You're goofy.
I'm good.
Yeah. You go from one little thing to another, and then you start talking about your shoes.
Which, by the way, I know you meant that. In Yiddish, goofy means quite a man. I don't know if you knew that.
What do you think, after all those years of being on Letterman and how important he was to your career, the fact that he's decided to hang it up?
Well, I mean, that was his decision. We were never close friends. I was just lucky that he was a fan.
How important was he to you and to other comedians?
He was the most important show to be on. So then I, auditioned for a show after Letterman sort of made me somewhat of a known, comedian, more than that, after 8 or 10 years and 50 or 60 shots. And I auditioned for a sitcom, and I got the role opposite, Jamie Lee Curtis. And, me being, her lover, ultimately was, I got ridiculed by, I would say, over 100,000 cabbies in America. And before we had television sex, the cabs in New York go, "Hey, why don't you sleep with her? It's Jamie Lee Curtis." I went, "It's a sitcom, you moron. I'm not the writer." But then I used to get paranoid. I used to fax and email, not email, it's then fax. Right. When do I sleep with Miss Curtis? I can't take it. I'm walking around in disguises all over America.
Yeah, so now you're back in the sitcom world, as you were saying.
Well, then Larry David.
Well, then you did, of course, you did Curb Your Enthusiasm.
That ran over a course of almost a decade. And Larry came over to my house. You had asked me, and he said, "Do you mind playing yourself?" Because he knew that I did a scene in Leaving Las Vegas, and I played a junkie in this indie, which I really love, called Drunks, and I like doing some serious stuff. I mean, it was fun being in a Mel Brooks movie and stuff, but I enjoyed doing other stuff.
So what did Larry tell you?
Larry says, "I know, because I was typecast plenty by then." Not getting, Richard Lewis, he's
So you might as well just play yourself, was Larry's?
Yeah, well, he didn't say that, but I had to make it. First of all, to turn down Larry David would have been a huge career. At 49, I was 50. I said, who gets this opportunity? And who knew it would be such a cult hit? So I said, I'm in. But we were born in the same hospital. I had the right to ask him for anything I wanted, and we had other weird mystical things happen in our life. Met when teenagers, hated one another, didn't know each other till we were comics, and then I recognized them. I went, "You're that Bart. You're that."
And then you realized he was the guy
you
you
were enemies
in
a day camp, not a summer camp, sports camp. Hated each other. Never saw each other until we were comedians, became inseparable best friends. I must have put a few back. I went, it was like, "You look like Rosemary's Baby to me," like half a sheep, half a comic, whatever I said, I was drunk. And then he gets nervous. He wasn't a drinker or a drug guy. And then we realized that we were the same two kids, not to mention born in the same hospital, and I had to stay around because I was a preemie. So he was born 3 days later, but I was still there going, "Come on, hurry up." What can I be? I don't want to live with a caterpillar. So things worked out, fortunately. But he was mocking me then. He tried to strangle me with my mother's umbilical cord. We fought. We still fight. But he said, "Do you want to play yourself?" I went, "Yes. With you, I'll do anything." And thank God I did. Because the show was such a groundbreaking sitcom. I'm a fan of the show.
I think it's the funniest thing that's ever been on television, personally. But did it change the way people perceived you, the fact that you were playing yourself?
Well, I was more narcissistic on that show than I am, believe it or not, because that's the kind of characters that they were. And sometimes I was a little uncomfortable, and they would make me go a little deeper into ego, But some of it was so hilarious. He has such great instincts. I said, "You know what? Let it go. Let me just be a real jerk." Beautiful. He always gave me the most beautiful girlfriends. Of course, he never let me, ever, not even the slightest kiss for 10 years. I mean, these were drop-dead killers.
Any chance you could convince him to do more seasons of Curb?
I don't know, but we discussed it, and I never asked him how many episodes I'd be in, and I asked him practically nothing. That's the way he wanted to work on Curb. Less is way more. Work with an empty slate, don't know much about what's happening. What's the scene again? Action, and it came out better that way. When actors who weren't comedians would come on the set of Curb, they were freaked out.
Was it more fun for you?
Well, they eventually, after one take, realized, wait a minute, I can just say whatever I want. I know what the exposition has to be. That's all you know. Just say I have to get a haircut, but I'm afraid of scissors. That's your deal. And I don't care how you say it, but get it in.
Go with it.
Just get it in there. And then they would do it until Larry was happy and the producers, and they'd move on. But it was a blast for a comedian. It's a dream come true.
Still ahead on Talk to Al Jazeera, Richard Lewis talks about his next role, playing a shrink. Stay with us. This This is Talk to Al Jazeera, and I'm Antonio Mora. Joining me today is Richard Lewis from Curb Your Enthusiasm.
How about the new sitcom you're in, which is going to be on Stars with Patrick Stewart, as you said?
It premieres August 22nd.
It's kind of gone full circle. You're playing a shrink.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, full circle in another way. As playing a psychiatrist, I run into a lot of these actors I don't watch a lot of TV. I like to watch the news and foreign films and documentaries a lot. But I know the actors, certainly, and some of these shows have been on for, and I run, hey, Mr. Lewis, don't call me Mr. Lewis, please. Richard, hey, you're doing great. You won 5 Emmys. The show's fantastic. And they say, what are you doing? I don't want to mention his name, but because I've forgotten. But he's a big star. He was on a show for like 10 years. Young, probably 35 by now, 40. He says, Richard Lewis, oh God, I grew up on you. Oh, thank you. And that makes me want to drink when I hear that. Not really. But you know what I mean. So I said, call me Rich. I said, what a success at an early age. And I say that. Then I'm starting to feel like, my grandfather on the railroad in Russia, drinking whiskey. All right, playing a psychiatrist is really a trip for me because I've been in and out of therapy and psychiatry for almost my whole life. And, but when I got this offer to do this role, Jonathan Ames is a brilliant, eccentric writer. And he created this show starring Sir Patrick Stewart. He doesn't need to be called Sir. And a great cast. An English newsman who's a drunk, druggie, womanizer, bad father, you name it. And everyone involved in the show has problems. So I'm the network psychiatrist who comes in to try to save the show. And it's laughable only in that, of all people, after 45 years of beating myself up, I'm trying to, in a role, and I'm enjoying the hell out of it.
Having been in comedy for all these decades now, what do you think about the state of comedy in the U.S.? In the old days in New York, you had comedy clubs in all the neighborhoods. Now it seems like it's changed pretty dramatically. I made it a point not to watch a lot of comedians when I started getting into it because I didn't like. I'm ethical, okay, in a ruthless field. You didn't want to steal?
No, I didn't want to hear other people talk about their grandfather's sweater because I would block out grandfather's sweater even if I had nothing funny to say about it. Maybe forever. It's just the way I am. I really am in love with the craft and treat it like gold. But the state of affairs, there's more edgy comics right now. There's these roasts. I'm not a fan of roasts. I would roast myself, but that's about it. I'm a First Amendment guy, so anything goes, But there's a difference between being an edgy comic and a brilliant edgy comic. I'm not talking about myself, but younger comics coming up who think they're edgy, but there's no premise or really nothing profoundly funny about what they're saying. And if they're getting laughs, it's because the audiences are getting a lot of that maybe, sometimes, and it sort of dumbs down the audience, and it sort of makes it easier to get laughs. On the other hand, I think there's a majority of comics now who are brilliant and are edgy, and I'm glad that there's moments when, whoa, he said that, she said that, because I would be the last person on the planet to say, you can't say that, If there's going to be a consequence, let them have it, but let them say it, and then see what happens to them. So. But in terms of the clubs and the promoters, the buyers, the club owners, they should all live on Devil's Island as far as none of that's all about money for that. The artists, we're all about being funny and making people laugh.
In his foreword, Larry David says that knowing you could cost you a job, a relationship, and quite possibly your life. Should I and all of us in this room be worried?
No. Larry should be worried for saying that publicly. I might kill him, but I love you guys. And you're one of the most prepared journalists I've ever known.
I'm going to use
that. Even though I came in and you called me Carlos.
Really a pleasure, Richard.
Right back at you.
Thank you.